In May 1948, the Zionist Jewish state of Israel was established, and now, after 62 years, it still describes itself as a democracy, despite the incontrovertible visual evidence that Israel is far from being a democracy, just about as far as you can get, because it is without a doubt a vicious, discriminatory apartheid state which one could argue is worse than South Africa was, even in its miserable heyday. But here is what they say about themselves.
Israeli schools, books and teachers teach peace, tolerance and respect. In a region where there is so much hate and violence, Israelis want the next generation to have hope and a better future. America's and Europe's ally, Israel, is a democracy in the Middle East. All Israeli citizens, Christian, Muslim and Jews, men and women, have freedom of speech, religion and the right to vote. Today, Israel is reaching out its hand in peace with a bold initiative that will give Palestinians the entire Gaza territory and an awful future.
More than 20 people died here, including a woman, locals told me, shot dead while waving a white flag.
Israel, a true democracy, is looking for peace.
So, while the world's most influential politicians are still lapping up that stuff and regurgitating it into their "We Love Israel" speeches to keep their paymasters happy, let's take a look at what was happening in Iran following the creation of Israel. In the early 1950s, Britain and the United States were hell-bent on torpedoing the attempts of Iranians to develop their own style of democratic government.
Iran, 1953. The CIA mounted its first major covert operation to overthrow a foreign government. The target was the Prime Minister of Iran, Mohammad Mossadegh. He held power legitimately through his country's parliamentary process, and he was popular. Washington had once looked to him as the man to prevent a communist takeover.
But the Americans can't take all of the credit. Britain's secret intelligence service, MI6, assisted in the coup to protect the interests of the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, now the newly infamous British Petroleum. Under a disgracefully unbalanced agreement, the shareholders received 58% of the profits, the British government collected 30% in taxes, while Iran received a measly 12%. So the motive for overthrowing Dr. Mossadegh and Iran's constitutionally elected government was pure greed. In Dr. Mossadegh's stead, they installed as Shah, or absolute monarch, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, whose cruel and autocratic reign was propped up and his successors encouraged by the United States and Britain for the next 26 years.
I talked just today to a man whom I believe, who told about torture.
He was tortured?
Yes.
And you believe that he was tortured?
Yes.
How many years ago?
Within, I want to be very careful, not yesterday.
Ah, well, maybe. I don't know.
The word has gone out to stop it.
To stop what?
Torture.
But a long time ago, yes.
But the victims of Savat knew better.
They would tie the hands and feet. And there would be some sort of a hood that would be placed on their head, such that whenever they would scream, it would echo in their head. And then they would whip you at the bottom of the sole of your feet with the electrical cords.
Perhaps to the surprise only of the tunneled-visioned British and American administrations, the Iranians decided in 1979 that they had had enough of the Shah and his vicious national intelligence and security organization, Sabat. Poor Iran. Who knows what the Iranians might have achieved had they been left to their own devices? But they were not, and in 1979 they finally revolted. The Shah fled the country, and the tyrannical theocracy of the Ayatollah Khomeini took his place. Then came the hostage crisis, destined to forever color U.S.-Iranian relations.
Good evening. The U.S. Embassy in Tehran has been invaded and occupied by Iranian students. The Americans inside have been taken prisoner.
The Iranian regime was demanding the return of the recently deposed Shah, but he was allowed into the United States for medical treatment, and it was feared that this could mean that a CIA plot was being hatched to reinstate him. Approximately 90 people were taken hostage, and 52 remained in captivity until the end of the crisis, 444 days later. This incident still reverberates within the collective American administrative psyche as an insult yet to be expunged, leaving what can be accurately described as a vendetta against any Iranian regime which fails to do what it is told to do by America. Yet America was guilty of a crime far worse than holding 52 hostages for 444 days. Britain's and America's imposed reign of the Shah lasted for a cruel 26 years, about 9,500 days, adversely affecting a population of around 50 million people. The villainy began in London and Washington, not in Tehran, and its repercussions have echoed down to the present day, and the hatred felt by Washington for Tehran has never abated, because Iran today is a constant reminder of Washington's wrongdoing in the 1950s. But the more strident partner in the double vendetta against Iran is apartheid Israel, another nation which cannot face up to the truth, and among national leaders, Iran's President Ahmadinejad is one of the few who dares to tell it.
Why is it that those who ask questions are persecuted? Why such sensitivity or such prohibition on further studies on the subject? The main question is, if this happened in Europe, what is the fault of the Palestinian people? This is the problem we have today, the root cause of many of our problems, not what happened 60 years ago.
The truth is that Germans and Americans have been paying Israelis to help them commit crimes against the Palestinians, but the Palestinians had absolutely nothing to do with what happened to a single Jew in Europe. So Israel wants to attack Iran to shut its president up, but makes the excuse that it is because Iran is a potential nuclear threat. Here again, the International Bureau of Double Standards is hard at work, because ever since Mordecai Vanunu revealed details of Israel's nuclear weapons program to the British press in 1986, successive US administrations have totally ignored Israel's nuclear program. And let's face it, not even the Israelis would keep a man in solitary confinement for 11 years unless what he had leaked was true.
Helen?
Yet a newly elected President Obama, ignoring that 24-year-old information, as well as what the CIA's vast resources must have since been able to uncover, failed to give a straight answer to Helen Thomas's very simple question.
Mr. President, do you know of any country in the Middle East that has nuclear weapons?
With respect to nuclear weapons, I don't want to speculate.
Compare that with the certainty with which he condemns Iran a few months later.
Iran has a right to peaceful nuclear power that meets the energy needs of its people. But the size and configuration of this facility is inconsistent with a peaceful program.
How can he know this and yet not know about Israel's nuclear capability?
Iran is breaking rules that all nations must follow.
And then came this. It looks more like a bar mitzvah celebration than a serious presidential announcement regarding the economic sanctions that were being launched against a sovereign nation. A nation which has not attacked another country in living memory.
Good evening, everybody.
And so the Star-Spangled Charade goes on. It is a double vendetta. The United States, egged on by AIPAC, will stop at nothing to satisfy its own and nuclear Israel's hatred for Iran. The maniacs at the centers of power in Washington and Tel Aviv are leading themselves and the rest of us to the brink of a third world war. So you'd better not just sit there when this video is finished and say, "How dreadful." You must do something, anything, to try and stop this madness.
I think this wasn't too bad for fucking Israeli.